Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Long Game Podcast with myself, Ben Scallon, and my extremely consistent co-host, Jason Osborne. You'll notice that Jason's background has not changed in every single episode of this program that we've done, and with me, you wouldn't know if I was going to be reporting live from the bottom of the Marianas Trench or deep space or prison. So I think I have to admire the dedication and just constant consistency that you've maintained throughout all of this.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that I'm being rewarded for my laziness here because I sort of just beat a track between my desk, the couch, and my bed, and that's sort of the bounds of my earthly existence. So whether I deserve kudos for that or not, isn't for me to say. But I'll take your praise regardless.
Yeah, the carpet in your house is just worn down in a very specific path, so you can tell exactly nowhere else has been stepped on.
Some animal tracker came in, they'd be able to reconstruct my days absolutely down to the millisecond.
Well, speaking of people who track other people for a living, that was a terrible segue. I don't know what I was
Yeah,
going
well,
for
it
there, but
makes Drew Harris sound a lot more badass than he really is.
yeah. Drew Harris, the bounty hunter, that's yeah, not a great segue. Not some of my best work, I must admit, but I suppose we'll kick off with the most recent and most topical of our stories for today, which is my interaction with Garda Commissioner Drew Harris this morning outside the Garda headquarters, wherein I asked him about a story that I had published on Gript just last week that, according to FOI figures that we received back from the Gardaí, they are recruiting in IPAS centers. Specifically, they're holding recruitment events, encouraging people at IPAS centers to consider a career in An Garda Síochána. And this is not a new development either. This is something that's been going on since at least 2022 and remains ongoing. The most recent one that was released to me was in February of this year, so just a few months ago. So this, whatever you think of it, you could have many reactions to this. I think I know what your reaction is, Jason. I think I know what the reaction of a lot of our viewers is. I know my own reaction to this, which is to not be particularly keen on it. But to give the other side their due, the Garda press office response when I asked them about this initially was to say, look, we've never hidden this. This is not some kind of top secret. I'm paraphrasing, by the way. They didn't say this explicitly, but the underlying tone of their email was they said, yeah, look, we've put out press releases about this in the past, and we've made no bones about it. Again, they didn't say any of this, but the subtext was kind of, you're not exactly Woodward and Bernstein here. You haven't cracked some kind of crazy top secret documents that you found in Area 51. We are recruiting in IPAS centers along with a whole load of other venues because we want to increase diversity within the force and blah, 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 blah. And my response to that is probably true. It's not probably true. It is true. I mean, they haven't hidden it, but it's sort of like that old brain teaser about if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. And if the Gardaí have a controversial recruitment process, but the media don't inform the general public, then is it I don't know that I blame the Gardaí for that necessarily, but I think there's a failure of the system more generally that when I dropped this article, it exploded and got almost 1 million impressions on social media, and everybody was shocked and horrified to hear it because they weren't aware of it, despite the fact that this was apparently an open secret for years. So anyway, without steamrolling, and obviously I want to hear your take on this because we haven't really discussed it yet. This morning,
Yeah.
I asked Drew Harris, who is the Garda Commissioner, for his reaction to this and if he thought it was appropriate that the Gardaí were doing this. And apparently he was just as shocked as the rest of us. He said that he had no knowledge that any such recruitment was taking place. He seemed genuinely befuddled and perplexed by what I had told him. And he actually said, I don't know why that would be happening, because refugees and asylum seekers cannot become Gardaí. It's not allowed under Irish law. Now, that is incorrect, and he was actually fact-checked on the spot by his own press officer, who, at the end of the press briefing, clarified, actually, Drew, they can. There are all kinds of circumstances under which this can happen. And in addition to that, even people who have just been resident in the state for a long time, you don't even have to be an asylum seeker. If you've just lived in Ireland for a certain period, you can apply to join on Garda Síochána, as well as obviously Irish citizens, EU citizens, and so on and so forth. So he had no knowledge of this. He didn't think it was happening at all. And so if it was an open secret, as they say, it was a pretty well-kept one, given that even the chief of police was not aware of it, according to himself, and most of the public and many of our listeners here will no doubt have to scoop their jaw up off the floor. So I was wondering what you thought of the day's events and this story in general.
Yeah, it's shambolic. I mean, if the only way his reaction to this could have been worse would have been if, upon, your question, not only did he think this wasn't happening, but he thought that if it was happening, it would be an absolute disaster, because that's clearly the way a lot of our readers took it. Because, I mean, we've spoken a lot on this before about how this government and its many, many arms just does not seem to get optics. They really don't. It's like, yeah, I mean, I know it's been a semi-long-term drive on the Gardaí's part to increase their diversity and representation, but with things being as hot as they are right now around immigration, why would you be carrying out Gardaí recruitment outreach events at IPAS centres? Like, my God, especially when, whatever people think about it, a lot of the language that has, say, accompanied a lot of the immigration discussion has been like, say, replacement, plantation, all of these different things. And the legal arm, well, the law enforcement arm of the state going to IPAS centres to promote either career in the guards to people who, as you rightly pointed out, in many cases, it's very difficult to verify anything about these people. There's no other word for it than shambolic. I mean, if you didn't have this in sort of black and white in these documents, you would. I mean, I'm your colleague, and I think our reporting is. I know from being in the newsroom that our reporting is very well founded, and nothing gets out unless it's been double and triple checked. But I would find this to strain credulity, because it's just such a nonsensical thing to do, and yet it's happening anyway. So it doesn't surprise me that he didn't believe it was taking place, because it's and I think that very fact is testament to sort of how outlandish it is, the fact that he didn't believe that to be the case. But as you point out, it is very much happening, and I really don't know what to say about it. I mean, I remember reading it, I was speechless, as were men. That's why it obviously exploded as it did. So many of our viewers found it so difficult to believe. Yeah, I don't know where to go with this. I genuinely am quite speechless about this, and I'm not sure whether you have more to add to it.
I think that the main takeaway from this is that it is an absolute preposterous absurdity that any non-Irish citizen would be allowed to be a member of our law enforcement or our military or any other arm of the state's security apparatus. I just think that's ridiculous, whether they're an asylum seeker or an EU citizen. I don't care if they're French. I don't care if they're Spanish. I don't know why any country would allow that, because one of the main, not one of the main functions, the only function of the police and the military is to enforce our laws, enforce our borders. And those are things that you need absolute assurance of loyalty to the nation state. That is not to cast aspersions on any individuals who might be serving in those roles, who are not Irish citizens, or who weren't born here. I'm sure many of them are perfectly lovely people who take their duties seriously and who have no malign motives. I'm sure that's the case. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know that. If I'm in the position of recruiting you, I want to be absolutely sure that you are a citizen of this country, at least. That's like the bare minimum that we should expect, that you are part of the nation, and therefore I have a reasonable expectation that I can probably trust you to have the country's best interest at heart, as opposed to some randomer I found in an iPass center from God knows where, or some Latvian guy who just showed up here 5 minutes ago. Like, I don't know why any country would outsource such a critical job to people from different parts of the world. It just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, it's reasonable to have these concerns. I was having a look earlier, and I'd seen that it's something along the lines of non-Irish are twice as likely to say be in prison, and this can be gleaned from data released by the Irish Prison Service, if I remember correctly, but they're twice as likely to end up in prison as to commit crimes, I should say, as Irish citizens and things like this. And it's like, if you're intellectually honest at all, you know that this is where, we're living as much through, I've said this before, I think on the podcast, but certainly I've said it before offline, that what we've been living through over the past 15 years, certainly, although definitely goes back longer than this, but definitely the last 15 years, has been a definitional crisis as much as it's been a, crisis in reality on the ground, a sort of concrete reality where terms have ceased to have meaning, which has darkened our discussions about things to the point that, a lot of the time we're chatting with people who come from relatively similar backgrounds to us, but we're ultimately chatting about different things. I mean, the most black and white obvious example of this is the transgender madness of the past 15 years in particular, where you have people who, honest to God, will tell you that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man, despite that sort of, again, as we've said before, being akin to 2 + 2 = 5, and it dissolves the words woman and man of having all of their meaning. But the same thing has happened on multiple levels, and it's the same with immigration, such that it was understood for the longest time that, the nation makes sense as a concept. And there's a whole load to this, obviously, but one ramification of that is that you're generally similar to the people that you are living alongside within this entity, for want of a better way of putting it. The way this sort of breaks down, there's been a lot of doubt cast on this, on those definitions and on these concepts and categories and things like this. The way that breaks down when it comes to law enforcement and law and order is that, it's kind of just been forgotten that people don't think the same way as Irish people do about these things. So of course, it's an absolutely valid thing to do, to question accepting people into the law enforcement body of the state in a fairly lax way. I mean, I know they have to go through the same vetting as other people, but it seems difficult to envision how that's to be done when, they're a lot less verifiable by definition coming from somewhere else than an Irish person is, who's been living in the state their whole life and presumably been going through all of the documented motions that the rest of us have to. So it's just we live very much through a definitional crisis, and I think the fact that we sort of, I don't know, willingly subjected ourselves to dumber conversations about these things has allowed developments like this to take place, where you can have elected officials and people in high-ranking civil offices sort of acting as though this is a normal thing, and it really, really isn't, it seems to me.
Yeah, it's not at all. And the justification, the half-baked argument that they used to try and defend this, which is the argument that was made to me by the Gardaí when I inquired about it, was they said, look, we want a diverse workforce that represents the people in the society. So the idea, the implicit idea that they were trying to get across was, the Nigerian community should be policed by Nigerian guards, and the Chinese community should be policed by Chinese guards, and women should be policed by female guards, and so on and so forth. And that way, when people look at the police, none of this was said outright, but I'm sure they wouldn't disagree with this characterization. This is the clear implication of what they're saying, that we don't want people to look at the police and think, oh, it's just a bunch of white straight men who are lording over me and ruling my life and forcing me to do this and that. that it's a representative organization that encompasses the whole of society, and therefore people have a better perception of the police and say, well, I'll take orders from you because I know you don't have an axe to grind against me. You're not being racist or sexist or whatever it is. You're just like me, kind of thing. And that to me is an outrageous insult to the ordinary members of An Garda Síochána who are not racist, are not sexist, do not have any kind of preconceived bigotries or unconscious bias, as they like to say.
If I could interrupt a second, I would say the insult goes broader than that. It's an insult to every, Irish person who's eligible to join the Guard, saying that you wouldn't be able to objectively police these people who say don't look like you or don't come where you're from. That you, and as you say, I know you're outlining it, that they say these communities, as they put it, might take issue with it, but that's very much where it plays. If you come to a country, you have to play by the country's rules rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of the system that we have, and not just here in Ireland, but in the whole Western world, one of the things that makes the West what it is that the law is the law is the law is the law. It doesn't matter who is enforcing it. It doesn't matter what you think of them as an individual. The Garda is, this is why, not to go off on a tangent, but this is why in every country in the world, assaulting a police officer, or God forbid, killing a police officer, is seen as extremely serious, much more so than if you just killed a random person on the street, because they are agents of the entire legal system itself. They are effectively a representation of the law itself. So if you strike a police officer, you are attacking the very foundation of the law-based society and the justice system. You're not just punching some guy named Mick in the face. And so extrapolating that to this conversation that we're having, Gardaí are almost meant to be faceless entities. They're almost not even meant to be themselves while they have the uniform on. They are, for all intents and purposes, the Irish law, the Irish legal system. And so it doesn't matter if the guy who's giving you a direction, provided the, everything is appropriate and he's doing his job properly, it doesn't matter if he's from Ireland or from Japan or from France. The point is, it's the law that you need to follow. It doesn't matter what you think of him. You can have whatever view you want of him as an individual. So if somebody says, well, I'm Brazilian and I don't like that an Irish Garda is giving me an instruction, I would rather follow a Brazilian Garda. First of all, I don't care what you think. You have to follow the law anyway. And second of all, get over it, basically. The law of the land is what's important, not who is enforcing it. And also there's another element to this where you go, yeah, in a majority Irish country, believe it or not, in Ireland, most of the Gardaí are going to be Irish. I know that's a shocking thing. If I had my way, 100% of the Gardaí will be Irish, but that's another story, as we've discussed earlier on this very program. But I think this idea of trying to turn the police into a wonderful pizza pie of every type of permutation of human being and identity you could possibly have is laughable stupidity.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of speed running the path that the UK has been walking over decades, which is obviously worse in many ways, because it's been sort of emblematic of what people are calling online the UK, spelled Yookay, where they're describing it as a sort of parallel entity to actual Britain that's grown up over the past couple of decades, where everything's dysfunctional and sort of dystopian. And emblematic of that over the past while has been the emergence of this discussion about communities. They keep talking about, say, the Muslim community, the Hindu community. And in this framework, the only role the state kind of plays is as this sort of benevolent facilitator of the operations of all of these different communities in parallel. But why people can't see the outcome of this or the trajectory of this is unbelievable to me. It's like it seems really obvious to me, and obviously to you and to, I'm sure, many of our listeners, but it's like what you're doing there is you're essentially just promoting it's state-backed tribalism, to put it that way. It's essentially promoting, each to their own, which is why in the UK you have many places where the police, and same in France, again, places where sort of mass immigration has been allowed just to run its course. The police won't go into. They kind of just leave them to their own devices. And the same kind of thing is going to be happening here when you start seeing this communities discussion where, yeah, you're kind of, by this idea that you have to have a representative police force, so that, say, I don't know, you could have Nigerian Gardaí who go to Nigerian communities, and Irish Gardaí who go to Irish communities, Brazilian Gardaí who go to Brazilian communities. What you're doing there is fostering parallel societies outside of the traditional sort of objective legal structure of the state. Because, as you say, the ideal would be that it wouldn't matter what a Gardaí would look like. People would greet them as a representative of the Irish law and, deal with them on that basis. But that's clearly what we're moving away from. And to bring it back to what I was saying about this sort of definitional crisis, we've moved from an objective world of shared morality, and this has happened in so many areas, to one of sort of subjective lived experience. That's what, and I would say that critical theory has been essential to this development, which I would very, very much refute, but that would require, many, many lectures, never mind podcast episodes to break down. But this has been absolutely terrible, because this is no basis on which to operate a society. This is the end point, I suppose, of maximum individualism. There's no basis upon which to operate a society, and I think that what we're going to witness in Irish society, when you see things like this taking place, and this is just one instantiation of it, is just greater fragmentation, which will result in greater tribalism. And I'm going to be really annoyed when it happens rather than if. 25, 30 years from now, when inevitably, certainly the UK and France, and probably us as well, will be experiencing the avoidable consequences of this, and everyone will be acting as though it wasn't avoidable. It's like it absolutely was. I think the sort of the threat posed to social cohesion has never, ever been taken seriously by the people in authority in this country.
Never. And, that kind of dovetails with another story that we wanted to touch on. We can kind of just continue the same discussion, but just add this into the mix because I thought it was worth talking about. Was last week those remarks that Taoiseach Micheál Martin made about Ireland being a homogenous nation. And so for those who, many people will have seen this by now, it was doing the rounds and it caused a bit of a stir on social media. But for those who aren't in the know, an old clip resurfaced from about 2021 of Taoiseach Micheál Martin saying that Ireland was never a homogenous country at any point in its history, and that its identity was never static. And a lot of people got very upset about this because they were saying you're essentially denying that Ireland has a distinct identity. The claim was, the accusation that was being leveled against him was that he was arguing Ireland is just this kind of nebulous, loosey-goosey thing that doesn't have any real strict definition. It's changing in an amorphous way from one day to another, and that for that reason, anyone can just kind of anything. Chinese New Year could be an Irish festival. There's no real strict limits or definition on what Ireland is. That was the charge that was being leveled against him by people who were upset by this. So I asked him about it. I said, would you like to respond to those accusations and the upset that this has caused? And he's very dismissive. He said, look, this was years ago. It never caused a stir when I said it initially. Would you relax, kind of thing? That was the general vibe. And he said he didn't take back his comments. He said he stood by them 100%. And he went on this history lecture, which I didn't mind, by the way, because I'm a history buff, as I believe you are too. I wish frankly, not to, I'm going to upset people by giving him a compliment here in the middle of this conversation, which, I do not agree at all with his overall thesis, but I will say I appreciated, in a country of extremely vapid politicians with nothing to say about anything, even though I disagreed with his point, I did like that we at least have a Taoiseach who can talk about the history of the nation going back a millennia or so. I thought that was at least good, if nothing else. But regardless,
well, as you say, that should be a prerequisite of the office, but unfortunately it isn't, as you say.
Yeah, you'd get a significantly lower caliber of person, I think, in many ways. And of course, he used to be a teacher, so that probably helps. But regardless, with all of that said, Mihal glazing out of the way, uh, he he talked about how the Normans came and the Vikings came and we went abroad and the people came here and there was all these different migrations and movements of people and of course they all influenced what we are today. So you can't really say, again, I'm paraphrasing here. You can go watch the clip to see exactly what he said. I don't want to do his argument an injustice, but his general kind of the thrust of his point was essentially that um the nation state as this very strict, solidly defined thing is a relatively new concept, and really our view of Irishness should be a little bit more open. Who's to say that somebody that a certain cultural practice isn't Irish? If a lot of people come here and they call this country their home and they do a certain thing that we didn't do historically, why can't that be incorporated into our identity of ourselves? So um I mean, I just fundamentally reject that idea. He's right in the sense that the Vikings and the Normans and these different kinds of groups did, of course, have an influence on the culture. I don't know that that was such a good influence. I mean, they were literally pillaging slavers and marauding savages who cut people's heads off. I'm not implying that there's a link there between our own modern situation and that. I'm just saying that I don't know if that's the example I would point to of forces
it wasn't exactly an example of positive mixing, to put it that way.
No, yeah, an invading force landing in a longboat and chopping off the head of everybody within a 2 kilometer radius and enslaving the women is not exactly what I think of as a great. I don't know that the island was better for that, despite the fact that we ended up here at the end of it. So, yeah, I mean, it's just. What before I go on any further, what did you think of it? I do have thoughts on it, but I don't want to. I'd like to hear your take before we launch into it too much more deeply.
I was going to suggest maybe the additional context that the reason, if I understand the chronology correctly, the reason this had come back into sort of the timeline in the discussion was because of comments made. Gosh, I can't remember her name now. Brianna something. Hiba. Hiba. That's funny. I swapped into the sort of language as part of my brain, and as people will have heard now that I'm living and learning Polish, whenever I sort of tap into the language side of my brain, all of the languages just get mixed up. When I said Hiba, that's the Polish word for perhaps. So funny that would happen. But and that happened with a French friend recently as well, where I was chatting to a French friend, and I just swapped into Polish as I was chatting to her, and it's done completely unpretentiously. It just happened. But yeah, that sort of
can you do anything unpretentiously?
Well, clearly, yeah, I know. I'm just after giving this dropping my subpar language skills here, so it'll make up for the fact that I have 5'6", 5'6" height. But anyway, I was going to say that I think it was Breen and Diarmida who had said she used an interview about the RTE series recently, That Small Island. She told Mark Hennessy of the Irish Times, she said something about how this homogenous Ireland idea, this little Catholic thing, was never the case. We were never homogenous, always hybrids, always mongrels. We didn't set out to prove that, but that's what came out. So the reason I just provide that context is I understand that's where people had gone back and found the Taoiseach's comments in relation to Ireland, the Irish never having been a homogenous group. And there's a lot to be said about this, which is that, a couple of, I think it was I don't actually think it was on the podcast, but I think it was on the live stream with Fatima that I was discussing a sort of recent lecture that the Irish EU Commissioner Michael McGrath gave. He gave an address about sort of European democracy efforts. And in I think it was in the Q&A after the address that he was kind of positioning Ireland nearly, and he didn't say it exactly like this, but it was kind of like he was positioning Ireland as an anti-Hungary, anti-Poland, which is to say that like it's the sort of EU dream nearly, or the liberal dream, this kind of thing. And I think that conversations like this about the Irish never having been homogenous and using the word like mongrels to describe the Irish is the epitome of things like this. I saw some stupid tweet over the weekend, someone coming along with their edgy take like, oh, I don't know why this provoked such a big reaction. Sure, if you go back far enough, we're all mongrels, we're all mixing. And it's like, well, okay, say that about Palestinians then. Say that about Jews. Say that about any other group of people. They won't do it, of course, because they know that mongrels is incredibly dehumanizing language, but for whatever reason, the elite in Irish society seem to think it's absolutely fine to apply, whatever, if they want to apply that term to themselves, but don't tar a whole country with that. Aside from it being untrue.
I mean, sorry to interrupt, but like, are we not literally calling mixed race people mongrels? Like, what side of the political spectrum are you dealing with here? Like, I don't know. Like, who would you, if you pulled that quote out and you said, which Irish political figure do you think said this? I would not have guessed where that came from. I'll put it that way,
Again, like if you swapped out Ireland and you put in any other sort of like group of peoples or anything like this, you could attribute. Most people would assume that kind of quote came from someone on the like extreme right of any particular country. Never mind the sort of mainstream establishment in Ireland, who are obviously as mild as lukewarm water. But suffice to say, like, it's incredibly inappropriate language in the public sphere, incredibly insensitive, incredibly inflammatory, and it sort of contributes to this trend. I can't remember whether it was 2 or 3 years ago now, that there was this headline in a newspaper article that obviously made people understandably annoyed, where the Irish Times, possibly the Independent, I can't quite remember, who had interviewed someone who had moved to Ireland, and he was saying something like, I feel like it's possible to become Irish in a way that can't be said the same of like Brazil or Japan or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but he was essentially saying there's something unique about Irishness that allows other people to step into it that doesn't apply to other ethnicities and things like this. And it's like, the only reason people are able to say that is because the establishment in Ireland has memed itself into that corner. It's like, it's no more true of Irish people than it is of African Americans. Like, it's or any other group of people you want to say. So I just feel like this is one area that, again, the establishment is going to talk itself into a corner, and now they have to permit all kinds of talk about Irishness and what it is to be Irish, when, again, on the face of it, and I feel like we're both Catholic, and I feel like we obviously want to be very charitable and recognize the dignity in people, and so I think therefore Catholics are very reluctant to get involved in these sort of charged conversations. But you have to be bold enough to say that this is incredibly dehumanizing language. Whether you apply it to, when we recognize it when it's applied to other people, we're a lot less quick to recognize it when it's, applied to the group to which we belong, which, this is. And it's particularly dangerous, you would say, when the elite of a society is applying that to, everyone as a whole. So, you'd probably be gathering from this that I'm no fan of it. But it's really sort of become par for the course. And I was very heartened, I suppose, to see it called out extensively. I think obviously our colleague Matt Tracy did a great takedown job of it in an article last week.
You know what else really irritates me about all of this is that so often in this country, every single controversial policy that they want to implement is done by fait accompli, by which I mean they don't try to argue the merits of changing Irish society. They tell you the change has already happened, or it's inevitable, or the thing that you want to defend never existed to begin with, so what are you crying about? And they try to just make it... you will notice they never, ever, ever make the case that what they're doing is correct and good. They always just act like, well, look, it's done already, so get used to it. That's the sum total of their argument. And so in this instance, when you see, and people don't like to talk about this, like I am of a mixed heritage. My mother is Jamaican, my father is Irish, so I feel like I'm uniquely placed to talk about this. when you talk about a demographic shift that might happen in a country where you walk into a shop in the ILAC Centre, let's say, and you notice, you look around and you go, I'm the only Irish person in this shop. I'm the only person who was probably born here. I'm hearing accents and languages that I don't understand. And by the way, this doesn't have to be a racial thing either. Everybody wants to jump to that and make it controversial. Like Americans, Canadians, whoever, name a group that as close to Ireland as you want. People just feel like, Janie Mac, I'm in Ireland, I'm on an Irish street, and I feel like I'm an alien in my own country. And when you have anxiety about that, or you complain about that, or you bring that up as a concern, the response is, sure, this changing picture, it's always been changing. That static picture of Ireland full of Irish people, sure, that never even existed. There were all kinds of different groups coming in and out, and we were going there and they were coming here, and this is just a continuation of that. So really, you're just imagining the whole thing. If they wanted to make the argument that yes, there is a radical demographic shift happening within society, and that's a good thing because X, Y, and Z, and here's our case, that would be one thing, and you could engage with the argument and you could judge it on its merits. But they know they can't defend it. They know that it will only lead to fragmentation, instability. They know that multiculturalism is a failed experiment. Angela Merkel said it. Macron and them have accepted it. We're the only lunatics who still think that this is a credible way forward. And so instead of defending an indefensible view, what they say is, sure, the Ireland you want to defend never existed to start with, and you're crazy if you think that it was ever like that. When you know it was like that, because you grew up in that country and you have a functioning brain. But yeah.
No, it's valid, and I appreciate we're turning this into a bit of a more general discussion, but I mean, there's much to be said on it. If I remember correctly, Fatima wrote something about this a couple of months ago, but it is the change that you're not allowed to acknowledge has taken place. And I was chatting about this with someone a while back about how, and particularly as Catholics, I mean, immigration brings about a lot of dynamics. Obviously, I think there's immigration on a scale such as is currently taking place in the West, coming with, I would say, far more problems than benefits on the face of it. But I don't deny that there are, say, some good aspects to it. I mean, one aspect that I would be appreciative of, say, is that this is honestly the case in many churches around Ireland. There are very vibrant, faithful communities from, say, Brazil. There's the Syro-Malabars from India. I prioritize that sort of above everything, and I think, it's just this is to some degree the way things have gone. And I think that, people living well-ordered, holy, prayerful lives will ultimately be to the good, even if that good is different to what came before. So I would come from that kind of place. But at the same time, you can acknowledge that while also sort of, in a very human way, lamenting the loss of what came before. I mean, I would be much the same as you. The area of Dublin that I come from, which obviously based on my accent will surprise absolutely no one that's South Dublin. When I'm out and about, like say my local Lewis stop, I would say it's, and this is being generous, I hear 50% languages I understand and 50% languages I don't. It is an enormous change that has taken place, and you're kind of expected to pretend that it was always like this. You're expected to sort of act as though nothing has changed, and it's incredibly disorientating, and ultimately, the common phrase applied to it is gaslighting. And you can acknowledge all of this without being some sort of like raving racist lunatic. It's like it's just to engage with reality, to acknowledge that all of this has taken place. And I think indeed, if there's going to be any sort of stable or coherent path forward, it is going to be because we sort of soberly engage with reality, rather than because we sort of, again, gaslight ourselves into thinking that reality isn't as it is. So it's all just to say that, a lot of the conversation that the mainstream would have us have around these things are extraordinarily psychologically unhealthy and unhelpful for us and for the people coming here and for pretty much everyone involved. So I think calling it out is absolutely essential.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, there's obviously the two extremes of this debate where you have the people who would say like the one drop rule applies if you don't have perfect Irish lineage going back 10 generations, you're not Irish. If your great great grandfather was from France, then you don't count, or something crazy. And then you have people who like the government and, you know, the kind of establishment mainstream view that if somebody from if an Eskimo shows up here and he can get his name onto a certain state document, that he's just as Irish as Brian Boru. And you go, well, that sounds intuitively absurd, I think, to most people if they're not policing their thoughts. If you just stop and think about it, you go, yeah, if I moved to the North Pole, it wouldn't make me an Eskimo. So this guy coming here does not make him, Michael Collins. I just don't think it's unreasonable to think that way. So,
and I mean,
I was trying to tease this out in my.
Oh, good. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say I was trying to tease this out in my mind and think like, what is the correct answer if those are wrong, which I think it seems obvious they both are. And it occurred to me that, you know, as Padraig Pearse said, the nation is a family grown large. And if you think about a family unit, the standard ordinary family that we all grew up in, it is the case that the vast majority of people in your family are going to be related to each other. They're going to be blood relatives who, your siblings, your nieces, your nephews, your cousins. That is the norm. However, we do have an analog for adoption. We do have an analog for marrying into a family. You know, I'm not a blood relative of my wife's siblings, but they are part of my family now because we are bound together in matrimony. And the common denominator there that links those people is love. It's mutual love. If you adopt a child who is not your own, you love them like a parent, they love you like a son or a daughter, and you fulfill that role to one another, which makes your family just as real as biologically related people. And similarly, like, you know, you feel the same way about your extended family if you've married into a family and so on. But the key point here is that while I believe you can marry into a nation, you can be an adopted child of a nation, you do not get families where no one is related to each other at all. Like, that's not common or natural or normal, where every single one of us has just come to some sort of weird mutual agreement. That doesn't happen. And so I think it is normal and reasonable, if you have a nation of millions of people, that the vast majority of those people are related. They are of Irish descent. And then we have room for people who love the country sincerely, who can become adopted children of the nation, not because they're looking for an economic opportunity, not because they came here because they felt like they could get a job and they couldn't in their own, the job market was bad where they come from. No. People who have a sincere love of this country, who meet an Irish person, fall in love with that person and decide, I'm going to make this my home, I'm going to raise my children here, I have a stake in the future of what happens. I think there's room for that as adopted and married people into our familial nation. But yeah, I just think that the extreme of saying somebody who doesn't even speak a word of English, who's been on the dole for 15 years, and who has their name on a passport is just as Irish as you or me, I think that's ludicrous, and I think most people would agree if they weren't policing themselves. Of course it is.
And like, you know, to get back to what we even started discussing, which was sort of Micheál Martin's comments in relation to a lot of this, he used an analogy that just absolutely does not apply to what's happening today. I mean, he said something like, I have the quote here. He said, you go way back through the centuries. I mean, the Irish went to Scotland, or an Irish tribe went to Scotland to have a look at a few things there and engage with tribes there. There's been a lot of flow down through the ages. It's like that is in no way analogous to what's taking place in the Western world at the moment, where you have, like, again, groups of people that were sort of ethnically similar, a lot of similarities between them. I think a good contrast with this, again, this is what's happening in the UK, but there were just some stunning headlines out of the UK, two stunning headlines out of the UK last week that sort of illustrated, and again, I was sort of concerned about, I'm certainly not just concerned about immigration for immigration's sake. I am concerned about sort of social cohesion and the likely effect of all this. Certainly, you and I have children, I'm very much concerned about the world my kids are going to be living in. And that's in stark contrast to these stupid morons who, when they're asked about this, and again, there was a couple of examples of this on the internet during the week, where you had these crazy headlines in the UK, like, I don't have it in front of me here, but it was something like by 2064, say, white Britons, who are obviously native to Britain, will be a minority, which is a massive development. Then you have another one, it was something like 1 in 4 schools, no, I won't quote this one because I'd want to be certain on that one. But again, it was another sort of seismic headline about essentially the changing makeup of schools and society. And there was a reform politician questioned about this, and he said something like, I'm not going to be here in 100 years' time. So he was sort of, he was essentially pushing back on people who would like to make too much of this. And this is picked up again by a lot of people who would disagree with, noticing immigration taking place, saying, what do I care? I won't be here in 100 years' time. It's like, okay, you greedy bastards. It's like, lap up everything now. Presumably a lot of the people saying this either don't have kids or they don't particularly care about their kids or grandkids, because, it's their kids and grandkids are going to be the ones directly experiencing the results of the choices we're making as societies now. And again, I've made the point clearly before on previous podcasts, and I reiterate it here, that I absolutely think that everyone, immigration is not a topic that I think it's good to be triumphal about. I think in the same way that, like, if you're out with your family and someone attacks you or attacks your family, you're going to defend yourself because it's a good thing to do. But a fight always leaves, an aggressive encounter always leaves a bad kind of taste in your mouth. It's a good thing to defend your family and, maintain order, to put it that way. But the whole episode will leave a bad taste in your mouth, and you're not going to be triumphal about it, or certainly I would imagine you shouldn't be. And I kind of think of immigration in similar terms, which is that there is nothing about, sort of enforcing, people might think differently to me here on this one, there's nothing about enforcing the borders and immigration law that sort of makes me particularly happy or makes me sort of triumphal about it or want to lord it over other people. But it's still something that has to be done for the sake of the common good of a country and for the sake of order. Indeed, like deportation flights, I mean, all of the topics kind of leave a somewhat bad taste in my mouth, and maybe that's sort of limp-wristed liberal in me, although I don't think so. I don't think there is too much of a limp-wristed liberal in me. I just think it's the sort of thing that it isn't appropriate to be, again, sort of triumphalist or loud-mouthed about. In fact, I find that very distasteful personally. But I think that
I mean, like patriotism, we all acknowledge is a good. It's a virtue. You should be patriotic. You should love your country. But it's similarly to your point, just adding on to what you said, I think there's a risk as well of some people when they feel like their culture is being attacked and they love and respect their culture, they start to become really chauvinistic and almost, I don't think there's too much of this, but like almost supremacist in a way where they're like, well, no, not only is my culture fine and good, but actually it's better than yours and yours sucks in this kind of a way. And I tend to view it like again, to continue the family comparison, comparing it to an individual household. In my house growing up, we used to have a tradition that on Friday we would order pizza. That was it. We would order Domino's pizza. Friday was pizza day. And in somebody else's house, they next door, maybe Friday for them was movie night and they all watch a movie or something. They're not worse than me. It's just different. And I don't want you coming into my house and trying to tell me I have to order Chinese or whatever. You know what I mean? And like trying to influence, like leave my family's traditions alone. I'm sure yours are perfectly good and adequate and best of luck. And maybe when I come over to visit you, I'll enjoy participating in it. Maybe I'll have a great night, family game night, and we'll do charades or whatever. And I'll say, wow, that was great fun. But I don't want my house's culture to be diluted because I actually like the way we do things where I'm from. And again, I don't hate you. I don't think you're worse than me. I don't think you're better than me. I just think that we're different, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, I think that's valid, and I think it's always really interesting to me how quickly, say, in Ireland, immigration sort of became the flashpoint, put it that way. Like it's always astonishing to me that 10 years ago, it certainly wasn't on my radar. I can't imagine it was overly on your radar either, Ben. It
A
certainly,
little bit.
yeah, it certainly wasn't on. I would say Irish society's radar. There were other things, like there were sort of progressive social changes, which I mean certainly still on my radar, but they were sort of the talk of the town for people who didn't agree with the direction of travel. And then you had COVID, and then I feel like a lot of this kicked off with sort of the war in Ukraine and what followed on in the wake of that. Um, and I think it's, as a result of sort of these things coming in, that a lot of these talking points that we're voicing here, I would like to think that we're being reasonable and indeed charitable and just in our discussion of them. But to a lot of people's ears, they sound like, not our listeners. Our listeners will understand, but to a lot of people, they sound absolutely nuts and far right. And I'd like to think that maybe in the same way that it's, absolutely, increasingly the case that it's okay to be socially conservative out in the open, far more than it was 10, 15 years ago. Again, I would say, I think the conversation is going to change around a lot of this, say 10, hopefully sooner than 10, 15 years from now. People will sort of get their thinking caps screwed on. But yeah, certainly the conversation is changing, and I realize we're having a much more general discussion, but I think a lot of the evidence of this is I would have, and I don't use this term derogatorily at all, but a lot of normie friends, say, who I would disagree with staunchly in social matters and politically and in a whole load of ways. But these are people that I love, indeed, I grew up with, and I've spent a lot of my life with. But even with all of those disagreements, and even standing in very different places as we are, a lot of them are voicing like discontent about the obvious change taking place, and they wouldn't necessarily know how to formulate it, or they wouldn't be very comfortable, and so they would probably be very cautious in terms of expressing what they kind of want to express, because it's still, as we say, quite unpopular to do so. But I feel like when you're getting that sort of discontent emerging from people who are relatively politically disengaged, the ground has shifted in a sense, and you're looking at you're heading into a different sort of ballpark. And you and I often talk off the camera about the importance of that shift taking place in what is ultimately a charitable and just manner, because there's a lot of justifiable anger out there, and I mean that genuinely justifiable anger, but it's very easy to allow that to be taken to an extreme of sort of dehumanizing other people, as is being done with that bloody mongrel language. I mean, as I say, I wouldn't talk about anyone else that kind of way. But this has turned into a much more general discussion than I think we had planned, actually. But no harm in that sometimes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think people hopefully find it edifying, and I did want to touch on this briefly. We're gonna have to speed run it because we're under a little bit of time pressure, so we might not delve too deeply into it. I think people can probably intuit our thoughts on this last story, that the media department, the government's Department of Communications and Media, was the main department that's been spearheading a lot of the government's misinformation and disinformation regulations. And so, just purely for my own amusement, I decided to ask them what kind of studies or analysis have your department done on the potential free speech ramifications of trying to regulate misinformation and disinformation? Because you're literally regulating the truth itself, as I said to Media Minister Catherine Martin back when she held that position. And they came back, and to be honest, Jason, I was amazed and delighted with this, because as you know from dealing with government departments, their job is to try and put a good spin on everything, is to do PR. And so often when you ask them a question, they'll either not reply, or if they do reply, they will ignore what you said and come back with some kind of non sequitur answer. So you'll say something like, why, what is the government's method for dealing with illegal immigrants? And they'll come back with some kind of response like, well, it's really important to deal with illegal immigration, and this is why we take it seriously, and blah, blah, blah. And at no point do they actually answer your question, and then you have to come up with a follow. So that's kind of what I'm used to with these guys. I asked the Department of Communications, what analysis have you done to protect free speech from misinformation laws? And on the first try, they just came back to me and said, we haven't done any analysis of that. There's nothing. So that's it. So, I mean, they're open, if nothing else. They didn't obfuscate in any way, so fair play to them. So
I mean, it's kind of like asking the Oracle, what qualifications do you have for, delivering divine truths? And they're kind of just saying, I'm the Oracle, what do you expect? It's got asking this government department, what allows you to sort of delve in this uninformed manner into this very contentious thing. And it's like, who else is going to do it?
Hello, I'm in Delphi. Like, what are you doing? But so then I asked Taoiseach Micheál Martin, did he think that was appropriate? Is that not very irresponsible to be regulating speech and not even to do an analysis on how it might go wrong, hypothetically? And he didn't answer the question at all. He didn't really get into it. He actually, bizarrely, he said, he was talking about how there was misinformation online about the Carlo shooting. And he was saying, and I noticed, Ben, you didn't bring up that, or you're not interested in talking about that aspect of it. And I thought, are you interviewing me now? Am I supposed to, I'm asking you about your government's policy. I would have thought that was the relevant point here. But anyway, he said free speech does not apply to lies and untruths. And we went on a big tirade about this. And the sheer gall, the chutzpah, the cojones of this government, having just come out of the family and care referendums last year, where we were told numerous verifiable falsehoods. The aforementioned Catherine Martin was fact-checked by her own media commission, the Electoral Commission. They said that her claims about the Constitution were factually incorrect. A Supreme Court judge, Marie Baker, came out and said, Catherine Martin is wrong. She doesn't understand the Constitution. This is the mistake she made. I then asked Catherine Martin about this.
Micheál Martin, you mean?
No, Catherine Martin. I asked her about it. She doubled down and said, I don't take it back. I was right. That's my interpretation of the Constitution. You can kiss my ass. She totally, absolutely refused to concede an inch. And then when I asked Micheál Martin about that, he said, look, people had a totally over-the-top reaction to that. Would you ever relax? That's her interpretation of the Constitution. Would you ever leave her to it? So when right before a constitutional referendum, government ministers mislead the general public about the meaning of the referendum and what is actually in the Constitution, that's no big deal. Would you ever just mellow out, man? Just relax. Stop freaking out about such insignificant minutiae.
We all make mistakes.
But then some granny, some 90-year-old granny in Roscommon had an inaccurate post on Telegram, which nobody saw, and that apparently is cause for calling in the Garda Armed Response Unit. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, no, it's this pattern has been apparent for a long time, that like when government is responsible for a case of misinformation, or reluctant to say, because again I like to be charitable with people, disinformation, out and out misleading. It's all, we all get things wrong. Mistakes were made. We'll learn for next time. When the public is engaging in misinformation, it's a threat to democracy. Like that, they can't see how dangerous this dynamic is and how unsuitable it makes them for, determining what is disinformation is astonishing to me. I mean, as I say, I don't think this is a conversation we can be having. I don't think anyone is suitable for regulating mis and disinformation. Certainly not the government and the the people in it and in the various state agencies that might be responsible for such a thing. I think a much more valid conversation, if you wanted to discuss the rapid spread of information, is whether or not, say, tech innovations like social media ought to be banned. Like, now I'm not advocating for that there, but I'm saying that I can at least see why a society might decide that it wants to have that conversation, because that, is a matter of prudence. You could reasonably arrive. That's something that a society or a government could decide to do. It seems validly to me. We previously we didn't have social media. We have it now. It could be the case that we won't have it again in the future. When it comes to like regulating truth, yeah, that's not the government's role. So the fact that they're holding on to this one like a dog with a bone, I'm never going to see this push as anything but sinister and totalitarian.
Yep. And until social media is banned, you should subscribe to this channel and this podcast, and make sure you get weekly updates when we're back next week with another fantastic episode. With
hopefully so.
Absolutely. So thank you all so much for watching, and we'll catch you all next week. God bless.
God bless.